Welcome to the Oshow. I'm Laura Babcock. This morning, an alarming report has come out saying that on average, a person experiencing homelessness in our city dies every 10 days since the group has been tracking the data from June of 2021. That's every 10 days we're losing someone, and the average age, 46 years old. That's almost half or slightly more than half of the average life expectancy in a city in one of the richest countries in the world. So every 10 days we're losing someone at the average age of 46. What are we doing about it? We know it's a housing crisis. We know it's a drug poisoning crisis. 50% of those who died of drug poisonings. I'm pleased to have here on the Oshow to give us some perspective on what the crisis looks like and what can be done about it. Nrinder Nann, she is a city councillor, but also the president of City Housing Hamilton, and is on a lot of these very important files for our city and for our province and our country. We all have to learn best practices from each other to get through this crisis. So Nrinder, welcome to the Oshow. I'm glad you're here. It's hard to believe it's your first time because it's your second term on council, but we're so happy to have you on the program. So can I get your reaction to that report that came out this morning? Is that news to you, or would you have been privy to that kind of data? And also, can you just give just a big perspective before we dive into a number of different issues on the housing front? Like, what is the state of housing in Hamilton and affordable housing from your perspective?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Laura, for having me on the show. I'm really glad to finally make it and really excited about this conversation that we're having right now, and a very critical conversation in terms of our city. You've already named it, province, country. It is a global situation right now. The stat that you shared is absolutely heartbreaking. Like, how can you be a human walking around in our neighborhoods and not hear that and think about the fact that there are 10 people that are loved ones of other Hamiltonians who have passed away simply because they have been unafforded the right to housing and have slipped through the system of support that is supposed to be here for all Canadians to catch us in moments of crises in our life. I say it so many times over and over again, we are experiencing a social system collapse in this country. And I don't want to mince my words. We have to name it, right? There has been defunding and underfunding of the exact types of supports that have been lifelines for generations of Canadians that have been eroded from one provincial government after the next. And where that puts us as municipalities is holding a very big, complex issue without the financial resources and political authority to act as swiftly as we would all like to around that council table. So, yeah, it is absolutely a crisis. It is a system that it's showing itself for not working, and it is necessary. It is high time. It's been past high time for us to get really strategically aligned at the municipal, provincial, and federal level in order to address this crisis that is not just happening in Hamilton, it's happening in communities across the entire country.
But other communities are doing a hell of a lot more, Nrinder, than we are. Like, it's incredibly embarrassing. If you look just over at, I believe it was the mayor of Kitchener the other day, started the Build Now program, 10,000 affordable housing units that they've got going. We already know that the region of Waterloo had been supporting even a temporary shelter program for years. We know Peterborough has been working hard on a number of things. We've had other cities declare states of emergency around the drug poisoning to get federal support in. I mean, from Hamilton, with all due respect, I've seen some good things lately, and we'll get into your vacant unit tax and some other things that Hamilton Council has done. But there has also been a dire lack of communication from Council. On your website, you talk about the values of respect and empowerment. How are the 2,000 plus Hamiltonians in homelessness who are seeing someone die every 10 days, how are the tens of thousands of people waiting on the city housing, affordable housing list for years, how are they to feel any respect and empowerment given the fact that Hamilton Council just spent 2 months fighting over 2 parking lots for 67 units? Like, it's disgusting. I know
it is.
It's absurd, but it's disgusting. it feels as though councillors walk over people in the streets. They ignore an encampment in front of City Hall. They don't come out and visit the people. They fight over parking lot spaces for 67 units, and a person's dying every 10 days. So I get it's a systems level issue. I get that it's provincial and federal, and we all need to get along and stop with the downloading and uploading and all that other stuff. But I'm talking to you in your capacity and power as a person on council. How do you empower and show respect for the people of Hamilton who are looking at this crisis with very little hope?
Yeah, no, and it's with empathy, deep empathy. And then in my positional power of a city councillor, I've had the honor of being one of the sole voices around council, especially last term. Thank goodness a majority voice around this term of council, to say that we have to do everything that is in our power. So whether that is municipal lots, I am so proud of our mayor for taking the action that she did to demonstrate the leadership to break the tie vote and make sure that Stoney Creek can be part of the solution to building real and new, deeply affordable housing units. What does it look like? It looks like City Housing Hamilton completely revamping its strategic plan and becoming very, very clear that we have a duty and obligation as a municipal leader. We think about City Housing Hamilton's 7,000 unit portfolio of homes. We have to think about that as infrastructure, right? And when we think about that social infrastructure and take our accountability to not only tend to those spaces, to be homes of pride and dignity for Hamiltonians, we also have to say, what else can we be doing? And so the modular build that we have, almost done on King William, the McQueston Circle apartment building, the revamping of the tower, Ken Sobel Tower, and now a new strategic development strategy that City Housing Hamilton is in the process of creating, which includes exploring the option of whether or not we want to create a charitable arm of our organization in order for us to also capitalize our capacity financially to raise funds to leverage provincial, municipal, and federal dollars to deliver. Hamilton has been recipient of millions of dollars over the course of the last 12 months. And so those millions of dollars, Laura, have been missing from our ability to enact our housing strategy. I know that doesn't sound urgent enough in terms of priorities, but it is a combination of working on quick wins in terms of our rapid housing initiatives. We've built 180 new affordable housing units in the course of the last 4 years in Ward 3 alone. We weren't even able to hit those targets on an annual basis citywide previously. And so, when I hear the frustration from residents, I feel it, and it is literally my accountability check. Is the numbers of new units we're building, the numbers of existing units we're tending to, so that they remain in stock and available. There's two strategies here. One is building new, the other is preventing homelessness. And I think that we need to look at that piece really honestly, because the rate at which people are entering homelessness or housing precarity is extremely high and only increasing right now, especially in the state of the economy that we're all struggling to meet.
And I met a young woman who came up to me the other day and said, I've got a 1-year-old baby. I'm a single mom. I've been waiting to get into a shelter for 6 months. And she said, can you please get the city to build affordable housing? And I said, doing my best. I know that's no solution for you. But I mean, so why are people getting into homelessness? We know why. Rent eviction rates are almost up 1,000% since the pandemic started. We know that ODSP does not meet people's needs. Many people that I meet who are in homelessness have disabilities, right? A lot of people are seniors. We're seeing a whole new cohort of people who are on the streets now, as you know, Councillor. I try to chronicle it the best that I can as I meet these individuals. And the fact that even a mother with a small child, a baby, I said, how are you surviving? And she said, I'm couch surfing. Right? So that's somebody who's precariously housed, who might not even be considered technically homeless. I mean, the problem, I think, is bigger than the numbers show, as horrific as those numbers are. I gave off the top 91 deaths since 2021, a person every 10 days dying in our city. But we know they're worse. We know across Canada that they're worse than even recorded because of precarious housing and couch surfing and the hidden homeless. So I guess my question to you is, Great that that money has come in. Great that the mayor used her veto.
Mhm.
And I do blame your former, who was the former chair of city housing for a long time, wasn't it Chad Collins? I hear that he wants to run for mayor. I mean, I think that the last councils have terribly mismanaged that file. There hasn't been a sense of urgency, but we are behind other communities, Nrinder, and it is
Mhm.
very difficult for Hamiltonians to see that. So let's talk about, you mentioned a couple of projects, you mentioned Ward 3. Let's talk about one that gets hung around your neck, which is the Darko Vranage project downtown.
Mhm.
And the idea that somehow you are a reason why it is not moving forward in terms of affordable housing coming on stream quickly. Now, it was playing out in the media, which
Mhm.
is why I have you here. I want to ask you about it. What was that all about, and where is that project now? In other words,
Sure.
is this something that we are blocking because of aesthetics or because of some sort of standards at the city? Are we not meeting the urgency of the moment? Or is this something that is progressing in a way that we should feel good about?
It is progressing in a way that we should feel good about. There is absolutely no blocking taking place. And it's really unfortunate that, somebody who's making an unsolicited proposal to partner with the city would come out guns a-blazing in this kind of way, rather than engaging in a really, important conversation of building partnership. Everything rests in how we treat each other and how we communicate with each other. And it's really unfortunate that the way that that played out. All that to say, to date, there's never been a decision point brought to City Council in any meaningful way. I appreciate that the Vrancor Corporation is in the process of creating a charitable arm, and they want to be able to give back after making multi-millions of dollars in this community on housing. And so for them to feel, very clear about their principle, this is their desire to give back. And they have to respect that City Housing Hamilton has our due diligence requirements as well. We can't just be like, okay, let's partner with you and let's partner with you and let's compromise everything else in our strategic plan. There's due diligence to make sure that we're not burdening the system and creating homes that are going to fail. And so what we did do, and what I did vote on as a board member and president of City Housing Hamilton, was to direct staff to get in conversations to explore that partnership and get a better sense of what's plausible, where do both of our organizations bring assets to the table, and how do we leverage those assets to deliver the best possible dignified housing that residents deserve to see in Hamilton. Also, is that location the most strategic one? And so what we learned in our City Housing Hamilton board meeting earlier this month is that the Vrancor Corporation is actually looking at multiple sites. And so I think everybody, honestly, Laura, is trying to come to the table with solutions. And that's what I do see the Vrancor Corporation doing here. And I appreciate that. I actually celebrate when residents and other stakeholders who have the capacity to deliver come to the table and say, let us be part of the solution, then it matters to get into a meaningful dialogue around it. So I'm hopeful that we're going to end up in a great place with over 100 new units, potentially, that City Housing Hamilton will be operating, but it really does matter. The devil is in the details.
What is the timeline when you say that hopefully there'll be those units coming online? What could we be looking at? Because as one of the producers mentioned this morning, great that there's these new announcements about new investments in housing, but honestly, how long before we're going to see any kind of a change in terms of people being able to access transitional or deeply affordable housing?
Yeah, we've got multiple transitional housing projects, one in Ward 3 that I'm really excited about backing with the YW coming over towards the Barton Village, actually not in the Barton Village, over towards Ottawa and Barton Street area. I know that they're in conversations now provincially and federally, and it's one of the projects that the municipality is supporting to get the funding in place to support exactly the single mom who is couch surfing right now. Transitional housing is a core strategy that supports people to stabilize themselves in order to transition into more permanent housing. And so when we're looking at housing solutions, we have to look at the entire spectrum. We've invested unprecedented millions of dollars, including taxpayer dollars, in bolstering up the shelter system here in Hamilton, particularly the women's system that had been underfunded, and now also the men's system. We have also invested in, I hate that it has to be temporary hotel sheltering, But in terms of our capacity to actually build the shelters that are needed for families, which is the largest growing demographic of Hamiltonians that are experiencing homelessness, we've had to do that. So, it doesn't feel like enough, but the story is actually hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of residents being supported in these shelter and transitional programs. The key for us is moving people towards permanent housing. And that number continues to fluctuate because as soon as we house people, there's like 10 more people joining the wait list. And so this constant revolving number of a target that we're trying to hit is, I think, generationally the most critical issue that we have to deliver. And quite frankly, every single one of us at City Council should be held accountable to the outcomes that we achieve this term after declaring it as being one of our term of council priorities. We have to be able to say to Hamiltonians, as a result of a concentrated, coordinated effort where we're all strategically aligned, this council delivered thousands of new affordable housing units in Hamilton.
Yeah, you do.
That's where I'd like to be able to say, and not just breaking the shovel, like breaking the ground, but actually opening doors. And last term, I talked about a bold strategy of 3,000 units in 3 years under the Hamilton is Home coalition strategy. And, I still would like to hit that target. Did we meet it? No. We had a pandemic smack dab in the middle of it. But is it still a realistic target for us to aim for as a municipality? Heck yeah. And I can't wait to be able to say that we achieved it. If it wasn't in 3 years and it ends up being in 6, at least we did it.
Well, I appreciate your ambition, Councillor, but the fact of the matter is Council declared this as a strategic priority, and then we spent 2 months, including a homeless encampment with 81 people
Embarrassing.
Living outside, freezing outside of City Hall. It is embarrassing. I mean, TVO Steve Paikin came and visited and said Hamilton Council, I think his quote was, are going to have to be a hell of a lot more creative if they're going to give these people hope. Right. And so I hear you having some targets and some new investments, and I hear your concern. I mean, you would go to homeless encampments. You're one of the councillors who got this years ago, but it doesn't seem as though your team around the table gets the urgency, because we're continuing to see fighting in the media and repositioning of what happened and Stoney Creek solution alternatives muddying the water. I mean, either council is like, yeah, what, where, how can we build it, how fast? Because it's a crisis response, or we are actually in this NIMBY ideological divide. So, I mean, really, where are we? Because I don't ever want to give false hope to people who watch this program, never.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so here's one of the challenges in lifting the veil on getting agreement and getting unanimous support. It took me 5 years to get the vacant unit tax brought to the council table, first as an educational tool, right, to have staff report back to help build awareness among my council colleagues about how this is a critical housing policy. Everybody misunderstands it as being a, tax grab or a way in which municipalities are trying to find clever ways to generate revenue. It does that, but it is first and foremost a policy about housing. It took 5 years. And it also required, consistently talking to each of my council colleagues to look at their concerns, to address them, and to have staff structure a program that helps mitigate those concerns and actually leaves residents able to succeed in fulfilling their declaration and also getting those housing units back online and occupied rather than sitting vacant.
Sorry, how do you avoid the problems of Toronto with their vacant unit tax? I mean, they've had, as Olivia Chow says, she's inherited, whatever.
A mess. Yeah.
So how do we avoid that?
So we don't do what they did, and we continue to work with the City of Ottawa. Our staff were at the provincial table in putting together the guidelines and framework for the VUT to be able to go province-wide. So our staff have been really in the weeds of the program, and they are ready to deliver for excellence. They're also very cautiously looking at the scenario that went down in Toronto and learning lessons as quickly as possible before we roll it out. So we'll all be watching closely, but also supporting our staff who've been really excited about this work professionally as well.
Well, I mean, kudos for the vacant unit tax. That sounds exhausting. 5 years to get a good idea,
right?
Like to happen.
Especially with 11,000 units.
Yeah. No,
told to us by Stats Canada sitting vacant in our city as residential units, and us working with the conservative estimate of 1,100 of those. So I believe that we are going to see a lot of units come off of Airbnb and go into long-term rental market again. And those who choose to keep them vacant, I look forward to using their money to build more houses as a result.
So I mean that's a positive step forward, and I also want to give you credit for yourself and Councillor Kretsch for getting a number of Hamilton housing units fixed up, right, to get them back in more quickly. I think it was, I forget the exact number around it, but that came out
478. Yeah.
So it matters, right? I mean, it's every time I hear a unit, I think of a family, right? And that
Exactly.
and how that's life changing to have a place to sleep and a sense of shelter and a sense of none of us could get through our day with all the things we deal with our raising kids and parents and life in Canada and inflation and everything else, and to not have a home or to have a hope for a home. I can't imagine what that feels like. But when you talk about 5 years just to pass a good idea at council, and then we hear the story of, still a decade to get CN Rail to the table about all those housing units adjacent to one of their rail yards. I mean, is that a lack of will by council, a lack of commitment as a group to use all the levers of power that you have? I mean, how can that have sat so long?
Yeah, I can't speak to previous term of council and why the file sat the way that it did, but I can assure you, since this term of council has come on, it's been a priority file for all of us who touch it. So Councillor Kretsch in Ward 2, myself as president of the City Housing Hamilton Board, the mayor, I sat in meetings with the mayor where we brought this issue directly to the table with the provincial minister. And I marched myself over to the representative of CN at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities annual conference in Toronto last spring, where I said, do you want the news story to be that CN is preventing and holding up hundreds and thousands of affordable housing units across this country, and particularly in Hamilton, where we are ready to roll? And you're not coming to the table in a way that is compromised, like seeking a compromise solution where you can also celebrate the story that CN is part of clearing the way for affordable housing to exist in our communities because you care for it. It was not what the trade room floor is usually used for, but we've been all using every leverage opportunity we can and every door that we're able to open to talk about getting this through. I'm hopeful. I really am. With the new proposal, I think that a lot of the concerns have been addressed. They've been addressed with really due diligence and care on the part of the developers and the engineers and the entire coalition on the city side. And I'm hopeful that we'll get to a resolution and not have to go through the appeal process. And I look forward to some updates on that.
So just a couple of final questions for you, Councillor.
Sure.
And I'm glad to hear that, because I do intend, if I do get to see this young woman again, to give her the link to this show and see if there's someone who could help her watch it, because I think that it's important to give people information. And one of the things that I have, as I mentioned, found sorely lacking, it's getting better, but you come from a comms background to a certain extent. You've worked around some serious communicators in your career. There are thousands and thousands of people who are, as we've talked about, on the list for housing and have been for a very long time. There are people who are in homelessness. One every 10 days is dying. It's absolutely crisis level, right? And then there are the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands who are driving by visible homelessness for the first time in their lives in Hamilton, especially up on the mountain and other areas that aren't used to seeing it. And they are feeling absolutely confused about how do these decisions get made? How long does it take to get new housing on stream? When is the dam going to break? Or I mean, when are we going to see some reduction in the crisis versus what seems to be only escalation?
Yeah, and that's where it comes back down to, Laura, that wraparound support as well as the housing solution. You named it right at the beginning of the intro. It's not just a housing crisis, it's also a health crisis. And, it is critical to operate at a pace of trust, which does take time. For folks who have felt so neglected by the system and harmed by the system, it really does take a long time to connect people connect with people in a way that they will trust the resources are on their way. And more importantly, to trust the referrals that our staff and outreach are constantly trying to connect folks in need to. And from that place, when people are able to trust that those referrals are happening, to trust that the care is showing up at the tent, right? Not come out of the tent and seek the support. At the tent is where we need to make sure that those connections are happening.
I have to ask you, because I know your heart, and I don't understand. When there were people, 81 tents outside of City Hall for a month, Councillor Crutch came by, Monique Taylor came by. How come you didn't?
Because I went to the tents in Ward 3. And for me, it's really important that I maintain building those relationships with the residents in Ward 3 and do my part where I can. There are 15 other people around the Horseshoe who have every opportunity, if they are not comfortable or not used to engaging in this relationship with folks who are living encamped, to do so. The opportunity was right here at the forecourt. Yeah. And I appreciate that people from a political optics perspective wanted me to show up at the encampment at City Hall, but for me, optics isn't what I'm here to do. I'm here to deliver and I'm here to do the work, right? So for me, it was about the Ward 3 residents.
Honestly, Nrinder, I was there a lot. It was about hope. It wasn't about optics. It was about people coming and Councillor Crutch didn't want to be in an optical situation. He just wanted to show support. So my point is, I just found it very curious that the councillors that I know care deeply about this and visit encampments in their own wards didn't take the opportunity to show people some hope. And so that's where I think political optics is an off-ramp that I don't want to hear used in this crisis. It's not about optics. It's about literally visibility of people who are homeless. And we need to hear much more frequently from our council and our mayor, what's being done, when can we expect things to change. But just let me end it on this note for you. When it comes to the very big picture, I know you can't predict how many more homeless people, like it's like a hole in a bucket. You can put in all the sand of the housing units possible, but as long as there's a hole, we're going to completely feel like we're drowning as a city. I know it's a big question to ask you, but given that you've got sort of the most data at your fingertips in your role as president of the board of City Housing Hamilton, what is a reasonable horizon for the people in Hamilton to say, okay, things are going to start to coalesce. There's lots of pressure for additional supports in all these different transitional areas that we need them. There's a lot of conversation around drug poisoning and all kinds of, I mean, just if you could, I know I don't want to ask you a hypothetical because I can't pin you to a future you can't predict, but just from a horizon point of view, is there light, Nrinder, on the horizon?
I have to say that I think we're going to see things get a little bit worse before we see the light at the horizon. And I need to be honest about that. The system collapse that we're experiencing and the impact that we're seeing today is still trickling in. And so I have to honestly say, I think things are going to get a little bit more worse before we're able to actually garner the level and degree of investment and priority from all three levels of government that it's going to take to actually address this housing crisis and this health crisis. Do I remain an optimist, and will I remain rolling up my sleeves, leaning into the table and doing everything I can within the positions of power that I have? Absolutely. Are we in the process of bringing on hundreds of new units in the City Housing Hamilton portfolio alone? Yes. And I am so encouraged every time we're able to welcome every new person off the wait list into a City Housing Hamilton unit, and also, encourage others to continue seeking out our spaces as a home and a refuge for them. I have to say, Laura, the other hope that I do have is you talked about innovation and the need to do things in a sense of urgency that will demonstrate something different for Hamiltonians. I think plugging the pipeline is a key piece of that. And the anti-rent evictions bylaw is really critical for many renters in our community to feel a sense of security coming as of 2025. I'm looking forward to putting that plug in the drain so that we can really hold the private market more accountable for its part in this housing crisis. It hasn't been created because people are in crisis. It's been created because the system has been in crisis, and people in the private market who have been really looking to up their wealth have done the most in milking the system for their gain.
Well, I really love that because, as you said, I remember when I ran a Chamber of Commerce, if there was a membership drain, it was like we can bring in all the new members we want, but we have to figure out why people might be leaving, right? You have to always plug the hole in the bucket. It's just good
Yeah.
management. So I love that coming up with that idea around holding, these renters accountable. Then you've got the vacant unit tax coming on board. These are things that are going to make a big change, a long-term change. And I know they took a long time to get. So I applaud you for that, Councillor, and for your personal commitment to addressing this issue. If I could leave you with a thought that I've left your colleagues with recently on this program around this discussion, which I'm very passionate about, is that there is the technical hard fixes, right? The quantitative stuff that you're doing that we will see at some point the net effect of that. Not in the short term, as you've said, it's going to get worse before it gets better, and that's certainly what I hear from a lot of people. But there will be a net effect of that quantitative work. There's the qualitative though, right? And there is the expressions of compassion and the expressions of understanding of the crisis, the tone around council, the comments made, the updates to people that I do think there can be improvement on, because there's a lot of people waiting. And in my experience in communications, if there's a vacuum of information or a perceived vacuum, people will fill it with fear. Right. And then they lose hope, and then they don't want to invest in solutions. Then they don't want to help the problem. They just check out. And to your point, you don't want people checking out. You want people of means to help and support, to get involved in their community as part of a bigger solution. It takes a village. So I just want to encourage you as a councillor who cares deeply about this, beyond even your Ward 3 resident updates, just if you can continually help people understand the progress happening, because I think a little bit of that, even though you're not promising the moon here, just knowing those numbers as they're coming up in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, how many people will that help? And so that's exciting to hear. And so I encourage you on that. Did you have any last comments for our audience, Nrinder, before we wrap up?
Just that, a big thank you from the bottom of my heart to anybody who's shown up and supported food distribution, supported clothing drives, supported from a place of deeply respecting the humanity that is in our streets right now. And I think that the more that we see that happening, the more of the whole of Hamilton approach we can really feel. I think that vibes matter, Laura. And when we have a community that has been struggling with too much hate and having people harmed in real serious ways, we are a community that will shine best when we put love in action. And seeing so many neighbors do that consistently on a weekly basis, yourself, your own family, so many hundreds of Hamiltonians across faith groups and communities and backgrounds, I gotta say it is part of the solution. And it might not always feel like it is significant enough, but let me tell you, every life that you're touching is a life that we're able to support and save at the long trajectory of it. And so that part, that individual action, plus all the system stuff, plus all the building that we need to do and the repair work, is all holistically the whole of Hamilton approach. And I really want to say thank you.
Said that. Well, I don't need the thanks, but I appreciate that. I mean, my role is minor, but I must say that there is often pushback, less so now, but pushback of, well, if you're out there helping, then that allows the government and the city council to abscond from their responsibilities, right? And so I think it's important to say that actually, no, it's part of the full picture. There are people in dire, extreme need right now who need emergency response from their neighbors, which is what, thankfully, a lot of them are starting to get or are getting, have been getting. And then there's the response from government of what you can do with all of our taxes and all of your levers of power to prioritize and to create strategies to fix the system and house people long term. So we're all part of that. It's not an either or. And I must just leave you on this thought. The most love that I see, the most support that I see is actually among people experiencing hunger and homelessness, helping each other, supporting each other, advocating for one another. It's a beautiful thing to see. So I think we should all do it with them as well. So thank you so much for doing your first Oshow, Nrinder. And
thank you, Laura.
Hopefully we'll have you back on because you certainly have a lot of the answers to the most pressing questions happening in our community. Thank you so much.
Take care.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the Oshow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the Oshow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the Oshow. It's a podcast, the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. Stay informed with the Oshow.